Welcome to this powder printer learning video where you'll learn how to make lightweight glass ornaments like this Christmas stocking using just a little bit of glass powder, some wire, and of course, the fusing factory powder printer. To create a powder wafer ornament, we start the same way we would to make any powder wafer. With a shelf and first stencil in the powder printer, load your first color powder into the sifter. Remember, it is always best to fill your sifter most of the way, even when you will only be sifting a small amount of powder. The weight of the powder helps it to fall evenly out of the bottom of the sifter. Sift the powder over the stencil. For the best results, move side to side and then top to bottom, tapping very gently so that you can build up multiple very light layers of powder. Much like with spray paint, the best and most even results come from applying many light coats. One of the most common challenges that artists face when using their powder printer is knowing how much powder is enough. For most projects, including this one, the trick is to watch the edge of the stencil cutouts. You want to fill the cutouts so that the powder comes just shy of hiding the edge. More than this will risk having the powder design's edges collapse when removing the stencil. Now lift the stencil off the powder printer. The easiest way to do this is to slowly lift the front edge of the stencil, then gently lift the stencil out of the aligner and away from the powder printer. Dump the powder from the stencil and sifter onto a clean piece of creased paper or cardstock so that you can reclaim unused powder and return it to the jar. Always double-check the label on the jar before adding powder to the contents, or you may accidentally invent a new glass color. Place the second stencil into the powder printer by first placing the double peaks at the top of the stencil into the orange aligner, and then lower the front edge carefully to the shelf. Load the sifter with the next color powder and sift over the design. You may notice that there isn't very much room for more powder where the first color was sifted. That's okay. In a minute, we'll show you a very useful trick for creating a layer of powder that is actually taller than the stencil. What we are about to show you would be almost impossible to achieve using stencils without the powder printer's easy alignment. First, remove the stencil from the printer. Dump the excess powder off of the stencil. Next, place the large square stencil onto the powder printer. This stencil was included with your powder printer. Place the last stencil you used back onto the powder printer, on top of the square stencil. The square stencil elevates the design stencil, so that the powder that's on the shelf no longer reaches the top of the stencil, leaving room to add additional powder and make the wafer thicker. Sift until the powder reaches the top edge of the stencil. Note that in this video the white is a bit washed out and makes it look as if the powder has completely obscured the stencil's design edges. This isn't actually the case. Carefully remove both the stencils. Some powder will likely have fallen around the edges of the design. Don't try to fix that now. All those bits will come off easily after the powder is fired. Here's our standard schedule for firing powder wafers. Note that it is very common to have to adjust the top temperature, which here is 1,225 degrees Fahrenheit and 665 degrees Celsius. You want to find the temperature for your kiln for when the powder particles fuse together, but before the glass shrinks or smooths significantly. While your powder wafers are firing is a good time to make the wire loops that you'll need for your ornaments. We strongly recommend a thin gauge nichrome wire that you can get on Amazon and from many fused glass vendors. Start by cutting a piece of wire that's about 1 inch or 2.5 centimeters long. Next, bend the wire in half. We recommend bending it over a pencil or something similar to achieve a nice even curve. Using pliers, bend the two legs out at 90-degree angles, as shown. Cut the wires. These short bent ends will ensure the wire stays firmly in the fused glass. Repeat these steps to make as many wire hooks as needed. Okay, back to the powder wafers. Once the wafers are done firing, we can quickly and easily clean up the edges. We'll do that using small diamond files and the fusing factory wafer workbench. When filing wafers, it is best to place the wafers top down on the wafer workbench because the top surface is almost always flatter than the back of the wafer, so the wafer is more evenly supported and less likely to break. Always make sure that as much of the wafer is fully supported as possible. The wafer workbench has a variety of different shaped holes, so that you have lots of options. You can also minimize the risk of your wafer breaking by filing side to side instead of up and down. As you can see in the video, much of the cleanup requires only a few strokes of the file to remove any roughness. Here's our finished wafer. This will be the front side of our Christmas ornament. Let's make the rest of the ornament. The first step for creating the back side of the ornament is to sift another set of wafers with one critical difference. Flip the stencils over to create the mirror image of the first set of wafers. Since you've already seen the next steps during the first part of this video, we're going to speed things up for the next part. Once the second set of wafers are sifted, it is time to assemble the ornaments. For this step, you will need the wire hooks and the fired wafers. Using tweezers, place the first hook on the top of the first ornament. Next, place one of the fired wafers on top of the powder and wire hook. Your wafer will be slightly smaller than the design on the shelf. That's because powder wafers shrink when fired. Simply center the wafer, and we will deal with the extra margin after firing. Repeat these steps for each ornament. Once finished, it is time for the second and last firing. Use the same schedule as we used the first time. Once fired, there's only a little bit of cleanup needed. You can refine the edges with the same diamond files used to clean up the wafers, but at this stage the glass is a little thicker, and half has been fired a second time, making it a bit harder. A glass grinder or rotary tool, like a Dremel or Fordham with a diamond bit, will make this step much faster and easier. You can grind the glass dry since it is very thin and unlikely to thermal shock, but you should wear a respirator to avoid breathing in glass dust. Using a rotary tool and a diamond bit, an ornament like this only takes 3 or 4 minutes at most to clean up. And the ornament is finished. I guess that means it is time to go put up the tree.